please welcome BevPaul.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. Jack and I are the only two lobbyists up here on the panel, so we wear the scarlet L on our foreheads, and we represent our farmer clients in Washington. So I'm just going to talk briefly about ASA's Farm Bill priorities. Obviously, we've been working on these over the course of many months. We just had our policy setting process at Commodity Classic back in February. And so we feel like we're on our way to getting ourselves organized to be ready for the next Farm Bill. Unfortunately, I'm not going to break much ground here today. I think almost everything I have to tell you has been said by someone before me. But I think the upside of that is that the farm groups are pretty far along in thinking about where they want to be on a new Farm Bill, and really largely in consensus on a lot of the policy ideas. So I think that is the good news. So for ASA, as you know, Congress has started on the Farm Bill process. The Senate has held their first field hearing. They intend to hold another one in May in Michigan. The House has held hearings. We've had two of our farmer leaders testify at those hearings. The hearing on research, Richard Wilkins, who is a past president of ASA, testified on behalf of the National Council for Food and Agriculture Research at that hearing. And at the hearing on general farm commodities, Ron Moore, our president from Illinois, testified on behalf of ASA. So for our policy resolutions, we just did kind of a 30,000 foot resolution setting process at Commodity Classic. You can see the things here that our voting delegates agreed to and put into our policy for this coming year. Like everybody else, they'd like to start the conversation by talking about what are the needs for agriculture rather than how are we going to live within the existing baseline. So we intend to start there. We need to fix the Ark County program, an issue that Dale talked about extensively in terms of what are the yield calculations used. We have a number of members who are interested also in this issue of reallocating, updating, adding base. You know, I think what we all know as people who have worked on farm bills before is that is a very expensive proposition. That's why we don't do it every time, because it just costs too much money. But I think increasingly as we get further and further away from the last time that anybody was allowed to add base, you get more and more stories from individual farmers about the dairy farm, about land that had never had base, about crops like oats or flax that had very low base participation, where farmers now really are largely growing corn, soybeans, and wheat for our members. And for those who don't have a base that accurately reflects what they're growing now, all of these conversations about should we be using RMA data, should we be using NAS data, all of those conversations are not applicable to them because they're not participating in the program in that way. So we want to open that conversation about adding base, updating base, reallocating base, with the understanding that that is one of the most expensive propositions in the Farm Bill. So we go into it with our eyes wide open on that front. Keeping the Title I commodity programs and the nutrition title together in the Farm Bill remains, a top priority for us. Luckily, it's not one that people are talking about breaking apart very publicly, but obviously there is a significant constituency of members of Congress who think that's the way to go. So, we intend to be on the record that we think that's the end of the Farm Bill as we know it. So we would vociferously oppose that. And finally, maintaining crop insurance as the core risk management tool. It's interesting when I think back to the last Farm Bill when we did away with direct payments. Many members of Congress talked about crop insurance being the Farm Bill. And I think that actually a lot of them actually believed that to be true. We didn't talk so much about the Title I programs because farmers weren't utilizing them at that time. And so I do think it comes as a bit of a surprise now to many members of Congress that we're back to talking about the details of Title I, about PLC and ARC and reference prices and loan rates, because I do think that there are a lot of members of Congress who thought that that stuff went away altogether. So we're not talking about crop insurance as much right now in terms of the policies, but again, it's a really important part of the budget discussion, and I'll circle back to that in a minute. So here we go. Again, you've heard all this stuff so far today already. For the commodity title, ASA supports the choice, again, between ARC and PLC. I think it was was it Dale who mentioned the idea of maybe trying to combine them into one program? I think that's an interesting idea and one that people are talking about. Again, this issue of should payments be coupled or decoupled from current production. ASA supports maintaining a decoupled system where payments are not based on that year's actual production. Again, the options on keeping or reallocating base. And then again, we, like everybody else, support going to using RMA data for our county yields. A couple of other titles. So for conservation, that's one that another panel is going to talk about, so I'll try not to wade too far into their territory. But we did pass a resolution asking for an increase in the cap for CRP. Again, back to the topic of money. This is a budget issue. And you hear different members of Congress talking about different increases. I think Senator Thune from South Dakota has just introduced legislation that would raise the cap from the existing 24.5 million acres for CRP up to 30. Ranking Member Peterson from Minnesota is talking about 35. So I think there's a lot of interest and discussion around CRP this time, which is interesting because that's not one of the conservation programs that has been so in the spotlight. But again, these issues are all about money. On trade, back to money. Everybody's got a big budget wish list right now. ASA, like other groups, is a strong proponent of this idea of doubling funding for our export promotion programs. The last time we increased funding for these programs was in 2006. So it's been a long time, and what we hear about MAP in particular is that it's been a constant pool of money, $200 million a year. And what's happened is that additional crops have come into programs and needed, export promotion, and that's great. But the result has been a pie that just keeps shrinking. So I think there is a concerted effort now that we need to spend more money on these programs. I will say that there is, again, a contingent in Congress that sees these programs as corporate welfare. So while I think everybody in this room says, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, that's not that much money, there's a constituency of people out there that's going to be looking to get rid of these programs altogether. So I'm preaching to the choir, but there's a whole different church out there. And finally, on the research and energy titles. These are important titles to us. The energy title in particular, these programs that support biodiesel don't have any baseline going forward. They're included in the Farm Bill, but their funding has ended. So reauthorizing these programs, again, is going to take money. For the research title, I'd say that I think the research community is maybe a little bit less coherent right now on where we want to be. ASA is a strong proponent of agriculture research. We have strongly advocated for ag research funding and for the AFRI program, which is USDA's competitive grants program. It has been authorized in both of the last two farm bills at $700 million a year. But that money requires appropriations, and appropriators have never gotten to more than half of that. We're at $350 million a year right now. So the question comes, don't you want mandatory money in the Farm Bill for research? Don't you want it to be like the PLC program or like crop insurance, where whatever the number is, that money is provided? And so that's a little bit of a policy debate. The question is right now, of course, well, could you get the additional $350 million that you need out of what we call mandatory money without the appropriators giving up their share of the money? Anyway, it's all inside baseball in Washington. But there is a discussion about changing the way that we fund ag research programs too. That is one that we hope to be involved in. So finally, I just want to circle back around to crop insurance because we haven't talked about the specifics of what changes to crop insurance might look like so much. Roger talked about it a little bit on the first panel. But I just give you here, this is a piece of legislation that was introduced in the last Congress by members from Wisconsin were the leaders of that, bipartisan, and we expect it to be reintroduced in this Congress. So these were the provisions one by one in that piece of legislation, which was called the AFFIRM Act on the last go-around. And I think it's useful just to see, this is the laundry list of all of the different ideas that people have come up with as ways to save money from crop insurance. So you can see it's pretty tough. There are a lot of things on there. And as the first panel talked about this morning, the money in crop insurance now largely is flowing to farmers. We have reduced spending on crop insurance companies over the course of years to the point where the money really is in the program is in the farmer subsidies. So if there is a concerted effort to reduce spending and it's going to come out of crop insurance, these are the policy ideas on the table. Roger mentioned that in the last Farm Bill, the House and the Senate both passed payment limitation bills for crop insurance. They were dropped in conference. That was a delicate negotiation, but both the House and the Senate have already passed payment limits for crop insurance. So I think that's definitely on the table. Another one that we watch very closely, because soybean farmers, by and large, are all purchasing revenue insurance, is this question of the prohibition on premium discounts for the harvest price option, which of course is ridiculous if you're a farmer trying to use crop insurance to market your crop. But that's a really big ticket item. That provision right there saves several $billion a year. So, again, we expect it to come up. I put this list up here for our growers all the time just to remind them these are all the different ways you could save money out of crop insurance. So there are a lot of little brush fires burning all the time on crop insurance to be put out.